when using tongs, this question was from Christy. When using tongs, what is a reliable method for covering the small holes left behind in a way that doesn't show as a different color in the fired piece? So tong marks, generally, like I would just brush a new, like if I have tong marks on my piece, I would just take a little pointy brush and touch up. And generally, you shouldn't be able to see those. Reasons why you could still see your tong marks after the glaze firing are either if your glaze is under fired, so it's not completely melting, so it's just kind of a stiffer glaze, it's not fluid enough. Another way to prevent tong marks is to flocculate your glaze, which, as I was saying when we were talking about kiln wash, when you flocculate your glaze, it lengthens the time the glaze takes to dry, which can remove imperfections like drips and tong marks. And so if you flocculate your glaze, so some glazes, you know, we could dip our pot and pull it out, and then the glaze just like dries instantly. You can watch it go from wet to dry in a couple seconds. And sometimes that can leave drips and marks that show up after the glaze firing. But when you flocculate your glaze, what the flocculating does is it helps the clay in the glaze recipe to hang on to the water, so the water doesn't get sucked into the bisque right away. Some of the water gets held in between the clay particles in the glaze, so in the application of the glaze layer, the water stays in the glaze a little bit longer, and then that helps everything to smooth over before everything dries instantly and you get those marks. So every glaze will be different. Some glazes are very sensitive to thickness, so you have these tong marks, and so those are very thin parts, and then you do like a little dab of glaze over top of the tong marks, and you might see those if you have a glaze that is very sensitive, where it's like one color where it's thin and another color where it's thick. But generally, a glaze should liquefy and everything should smooth over, and you shouldn't be able to see those. It just really depends on the recipe. But one thing you can pay attention to is if you're struggling with tong marks, pay attention to how long it takes your glaze to dry after you pull it out of the bucket. And if it's dry before you're able to very awkwardly remove your tongs from the piece without like smearing the glaze everywhere. If it dries within a couple seconds, then you may look into flocculating with Epsom salts to increase the amount of time it takes to dry. So hopefully when you remove the tongs, the glaze is still a little bit wet and you can touch it up and everything will kind of just smooth over. So that is about tong marks. That is what I would recommend, is like paying attention. It's usually a case of the glaze dried really fast, and so you have this very obvious drip. And Epsom salts just helps to give more even application, because you remove your pot from the bucket and then the glaze takes a few more seconds. You don't want it to take more than like a minute to dry. That I would say is too long, but you just give a little more time for everything to smooth out before everything dries.